What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with Tech Daily. So 271 days ago, in September 2020, Samsung announced the S20 FE. And in the 271 days since then, Samsung hasn't released a better phone than this one, in my opinion. If you're in the market for a new device right now, this thing I think is still the one to beat. And I think a month from now, 6 months from now, maybe even a year from now, this device will continue to be the best all-around option for value, for features, for specs, for just about everything from Samsung's smartphone lineup. I realize those are some pretty strong statements, so in this video, I'm going to try and explain why I think the S20 FE is still so good in 2021. I'm also going to talk about how this phone stacks up against some of this year's new Samsung phones, because I think that's an important factor to consider as well. And I'll also get into my experience using this thing for quite a while now and address some of the positives, some negatives, and some important updates about this device. Now, it's no secret that the S20 FE quickly became one of the most popular phones overall from last year, and for good reason. Samsung basically just stuck 95% of the specs and features from their flagship S20 into this phone, and then just cut the price by 30%. They essentially created the best bang for your buck, amazing value device, while simultaneously rendering their own regular flagship S20s overpriced or obsolete or irrelevant, dead before their time after barely 6 months. However you want to put it, once this S20 FE hit the market, there was suddenly no reason at all to buy the flagship S20 anymore. Furthermore, I also think that this phone made other manufacturers sort of rethink their smartphone strategy. Flagships are cool, but what's really cool is offering people a well-rounded, feature-packed device with no unnecessary over-the-top gimmicks for a somewhat reasonable price, and that's exactly what this phone is. Overall, the S20 FE still holds up to 2021 standards, and in fact, this phone has features and specs and add-ons that similarly priced phones from this year still don't have. Most importantly though, even though this phone is still sold brand new, it's still relevant, it's still widely popular, you can snag it on places like Amazon for cheaper than ever, close to $500 if you go the Amazon Renewed route. Already, I think you can see why this phone continues to be an incredible value. Physically, there isn't anything in particular that stands out on the S20 FE, at least at first glance. It looks and feels like any Samsung phone released in the last 2 years, but there are a couple of little standout things that set it apart from other mid-rangers and bring it closer to any given flagship you can think of. Things like an SD card slot for expandable storage. There's no compromise there. You've got 15-watt wireless charging, Samsung's reverse wireless charging feature, and 25-watt fast charging through USB-C. Power-wise, it misses nothing. It's IP68 water and dust resistant as well. The in-display fingerprint reader is faster than any A-series phone for sure, and it's more comparable to the flagship S20 than anything else. There's dual stereo speakers here. You guys know I really appreciate that. Each one of these things is small on their own. Half the stuff I mentioned you may not even care about or use, but the point is, it's all here on this phone. And aside from a headphone jack, Samsung didn't take away or otherwise omit anything in particular. And in fact, like I said, there's things here on this phone that other phones just don't have. Now, I will say that one of the standout features for this phone last year, the 120Hz display, that just isn't as special anymore in 2021. It's still great, don't get me wrong. The Super AMOLED 1080 resolution packs a respectable 407 pixels per inch. It not only offers a great viewing experience, but also a stellar user experience, with the high refresh rate keeping things quick and snappy with every touch. It's just that a lot of phones now have 90Hz or 120Hz displays. It's almost become common even on phones that approach $400 or lower in 2021. Some of the newest A-series phones this year even offer high refresh rate panels, so it's not nearly a flagship caliber feature anymore from Samsung. It's still great, I still love that it's here, and it's one of the best things about this phone. It's just not necessarily one of those selling points for it, specifically in 2021. Performance-wise though, this I think is where we need to talk about a few important things, and depending on your own personal experience, you might have a different opinion here on some things than I do. But let me start out by saying that spec-wise, on paper, you really get an unfair advantage going with the S20 FE. I believe it outperforms any brand new 2021 upper mid-range chipset to start, so within its $400 to $500 and maybe $600 class, it's likely going to be the winner already. But even more than that, arguably, the price you'd pay for, say, the latest and greatest high-end 2021 flagship and what you get in the end for all of that money doesn't come close to the kind of value that this phone still offers. It simply doesn't yield a proportional increase in performance by comparison. $500 for the FE with its specs versus $800 or $900 or more for a 2021 flagship. You hear me say this a lot, but the diminishing returns on smartphones nowadays are very real. The more you spend, the less you really get. In the S20 FE, you get the Snapdragon 865 5G processor inside, paired with the Adreno 650 GPU and either 6 or 8 gigs of RAM. My phone here has 8, and all that has been perfectly fine for me. For all intents and purposes, this is the 2020 flagship spec. It's literally what Samsung put in their $1,000 top tier phones, and not only is it still good right now, it'll continue to be a great performing phone for 2, 3, 4 more years or more. Unfortunately, I do know that some folks have had issues with either overall performance on the device or specifically overheating with the processor itself. Now, I personally have not experienced that in my own usage, even as I have pushed this phone a bit harder and harder. I also believe that through a number of software updates now over the last few months, those issues seem to have been fixed or at least mitigated for a lot of folks. Battery life for me also has been consistent. I never experienced some of the issues a handful of other folks have had. And for all those reasons, I'll continue to consider this phone to be a powerhouse, just based on my own personal experience. But if you have had those issues with your own S20 FE, please let me know in the comments, especially if you still see those problems. I'd love to learn a little more about it. All in all, with the Android 12 updates slated for this device, in addition to perhaps some more security updates in the future, I truly believe this phone is a sound investment even if you bought it today. There's a lot of life left in it, and it'll continue to perform well and outperform similarly priced phones for a while. Lastly, I'll also say that the camera setup on this thing has been fantastic for me, and I have quite a few camera comparison tests on the channel already featuring this phone, but I'll keep it simple and say the triple lens setup with the ultra wide, the regular wide angle, and the telephoto lens is the perfect combination. So let me dive a little deeper now into why I personally don't think any current 2021 Samsung phones have quite matched the S20 FE. And if you disagree with me here, please let me know in the comments. But I think it kind of boils down to this. The S20 FE is positioned above Samsung's A series phones, but below their flagship line. It fits comfortably at that spot in last year's lineup, but now, even though the phone is nearly a year old, I'd argue that it still holds that position nicely, well above this year's newest A series when you look at specs and price and features, and obviously still below the new S21s, but comparatively a way better value overall than those phones. We've gotten a lot of great new A series phones this year, obviously, but even a brand new A series phone from this year still isn't better than last year's S20 FE. The highest spec'd A52 5G still has a less powerful processor, slower fingerprint sensor, no wireless charging, less capable cameras, and that phone retails for $500. There are obviously a couple factors here, depreciation on the S20 FE's part, and the A series phones of course not being meant to compete or compared to an S series device, but I think comparatively, value-wise, it just still makes more sense to snag the FE versus this year's A series phones. Furthermore, the flagship S21, on the other hand, maybe offers a bit more than the S20 FE, mainly with its processors and performance and cameras, but at $800 or more, it's not that much better. It's not nearly twice the phone for nearly twice the price. So again, by my own standards and comparisons, the S20 FE just makes way more sense. I'm not so sure sure that I've ever been one to recommend a nearly one-year-old device over any current generation phone from the same company, but that's exactly the argument I'm comfortable making here. The S20 FE is still just really good, and maybe a little too good. If you take the time to do the comparisons versus any given Samsung phone in 2021, and also factor in a little bit of a potential price discount as a smart shopper, it doesn't make much sense to get anything else. The direction Samsung took with the S20 FE was bold, to say the least. I think it wound up costing them a bit on their flagship phones, but they revamped the mid-range space in the process and ultimately created what I consider to be still the best bang for your buck Android device for most people. This is a phone that likely still has years left as a top choice device. Getting it today is a sound investment for 3 to 4 years at least, and I also believe this will be a good buy 6 months from now too. It's still the one to get some 271 days later, even with all the phones Samsung has released this year, and you guys know there have been a ton. But by comparison, the S20 FE is still the one to get, and I have no problems recommending it. So there you go. Those are all my thoughts on the S20 FE right now. What do you guys think? Am I being too over the top with this phone? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your experience with the device, if you have it especially. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow Tech Daily on Twitter and subscribe to the Tech Daily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.